So there are five main building blocks of story. You hit upon a bunch of them: plot, character, setting, theme, and tone.
Mhm.
And one of those has to be the foundation of your story. So if you have a character driven story, you have to start with that character and what that character is going to be.
Welcome back to Inspired Inc., the CWS podcast, a show where we promote indie comic creators and become inspired by what they create and their journey of creating it. I'm your host, Brandon Bloxdorf, and today on the show, we have writer Frank Martin joining us, and we talk about the pros and cons of having a wide variety of creative work, how past work can resurface and become reshaped after time, and why you should always just keep writing no matter what. All this and so much more on today's Inspired Inc. And what are your thoughts and feelings about graded books? There's a lot of mixed views and understanding about graded books. I see some pros and I see some cons, but you sound like a collector. What do you think about things like that?
I'm not a collector. I'm really not. So when you make comics, there's essentially two markets. You have the story market, people that want to buy your comic and read it and enjoy it, and then there's the collector market, the speculator market, where you want to make a cool variant, rare hollow foil, and grading is really only for that collector's market. No reader is going to seal away a book forever that they can't read again. So it just caters to that collector side. And a lot of creators leverage that, which is good because you need money. You obviously need money to make the thing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm a story guy. It's a different business mindset to get into that. I'm going to sell it to the collector. I just want to focus on. I only have so much bandwidth that I want to focus on making the best story that I can and trying to sell that story. That to shift gears and then be a collector salesman, it's hard to wear both of those hats. I would love to have a partner that would be like, Frank, I'll pimp you out. I'll be your collector pimp, and then market all my books towards collectors. But I don't have that yet.
I feel you. I've even thought about with our books dipping into some stuff.
Can I get my backpack from your car?
Yeah, my car's open. It never ends. There's no off duty.
I love it. No, yeah, honestly, when you're a parent, that's full time. You're doing three jobs.
She's whispering. She goes, "Can I get my backpack from your car?" I'm like, "Why are you asking me? Just get it.
Go, run. I give you that permission." Yeah, I mean, even then, working the avenues of trying to capture that collector market, I've thought about putting some of our books and maybe I should get 5 of them CGC, throw them up on our Kickstarter page, see if they sell. But it's who am I catering to at that point? And it's an indie market we're kind of catering to no matter what. So what do they want an encased, CGC anthology or, Teenage Babylon 1? What's the point for display values? I guess that's why we have wham stands now. That way you put your book up on display and you have a wham stand to cover it instead of putting it and sealed it. I could pick it right up and read it, and it's still in the same awesome display aspect.
So this is not comic related, but it's similar. So I had my bar mitzvah was baseball themed. So one of my dad's friend, who what he does is he designs invitations for a living. He made a crazy invitation to this party. It would look like a baseball on one side, and it had stitching on it and leather, it looked like a baseball. And he got it, I don't know how, but he got it signed by George Steinbrenner, the legendary owner of the Yankees. And he's dead now. So it's you can't get that signature. It was really cool. And my dad framed it and it was awesome. I put it up on my wall and it's been there for years. And the sun took a pounding to it. It's the signature is almost gone. So my comics are in plastic sealed away in a dark corner of my cabinet because I'm just so scared that the kids are gonna find it and be like, I want to read Spider-Man, just pry it open or something. So they're hidden away at this junction of my life.
Dude, yeah, I can imagine that. That's just one of those things where, you're taking a risk. You're deciding what's going to go which way. And you're like, what? I gotta protect my stuff. I gotta wait till they age, 10 or so years and move forward with that.
So But one of the greatest pieces of advice I got about selling comics is that don't market comics to yourself, or don't try to sell comics like you're selling to yourself, because you're not everybody. There's a
Mhm.
market. There's so many different people out there. And even if you're not a collector, it's still nice to think of and make things available for a collector.
Mhm.
So it's hard to put myself in that mindset, to get out of myself as like a story first guy and like think like a collector and offer cool variants and stuff like that, to try to cater to that market. I dabble in it. I dip my toes in it because you still need to fund those books, but I don't go crazy. I don't have 20 variants on my campaigns. I play around with stuff like metal covers every once in a while, but it's not my wheelhouse. I don't feel
It's
comfortable in it.
expensive too, when you're talking about doing a crowdfunding and to get some of those more pricey aspects. Like we've done the extra variant and we've done the extra foil variant, and they do okay, they do fairly okay. But no matter what, you have to do a 25 minimum print run. So if you're not
Mhm.
hitting close to that 25, like it kind of gets rough, you're just like, well, I'm gonna have these copies. I'm gonna have to
You
table the hell
gotta
out of
you gotta
them.
move them. You gotta find ways to
Yeah.
move them.
How do you
Um,
feel about tabling? Because your table setup is pretty awesome and extravagant too. I really like your banners and
Thank you. I
everything.
made my son do it.
That's
Just kind of through
nice.
it. I am not. I haven't. Besides that convention, I hadn't done one since like 2020, right before COVID,
Mhm.
and so it was kind of like my first convention in a while. I don't really know anything about convention theory or science. I just kind of like put books places, and hopefully people dig it. I don't know if you noticed, but my prices were written on like, I'm like, I don't have price tags, so I just wrote on scraps of paper and ripped it and put them in front of books.
Well, I do. Yeah.
Whatever gets the job done. But yeah, it was harder in the beginning when I just had like one or two books. I'm like, this is what I got. If you don't like it, you got to keep moving. But now I have a little bit of a shotgun approach where I can ask people, I'm like, look, I write everything. What do you like? And I can
Mhm.
guide you towards the things that you like. So it does get easier as you go on, and you could cater to more of the crowd that comes into these conventions, which is great.
That's one of the biggest things we've mentioned on the show before is like having a diverse table, getting something that's not just one flavor and giving options to readers and people who will want stuff. And it's harder, like you said, when you're starting out, you have one book out and then you have a second book that might be kind of similar. But the more range you get and getting put in like anthologies or just like teaming up with different people, challenging yourself outside of your typical writing or creating range, those books sometimes do really well at your table no matter what. Cause you could just, you don't like punk rock, well, we have cyber, we have sci-fi. You don't like that, we got this. You know what I mean? Like all sorts of like various stuff. That's cool that you have that same
there
approach.
there are pros and cons to the way to the amount of books that I put out. So I kind of describe it as like my itch. If I have an itch for a comedy, I'm going to write that. If I have an itch for a horror, I'm going to write that. I'm just chasing whatever story that I want to write, which is nice for, like we said, a convention where I have this wide range of stuff. In the beginning, if I saw a family or a little kid walking by, I'm like, just keep going. I got nothing for you. Now I do, which is great. At the same time, it's difficult when you're trying to build an audience, to shift
Mm.
gears all the time in a crowdfunding campaign. I've had people say like, wait, this was the horror guy. Now he's doing sci-fi fantasy. And then I launch again. He's like, wait, now he's doing a rom-com. It's just like, it's hard to build that momentum. But then I have people that do follow me from campaign to campaign, and it means so much more. They're like, Frank, we love your work. We trust it. Wherever you're going, we're going to follow. So I don't have a lot of those people. It's harder to, if you have a series that's like on issue 10, it's easier to get the momentum going. But I'm still having a blast doing it. And it's nice to see people say, wherever you go, we'll follow.
Yeah, and it's cool seeing a writer challenge themselves and go down those avenues. Something I kind of admired that like Scott Snyder was doing with like Comixology. He had like all of his books come out and they're all different flavors, and it was kind of like pick one, like whatever you like, whatever you're into. And that's what I like getting from creators. I like getting like, especially like I'm a writer as well. I don't really draw. I try to draw. It's not really there yet, but I try to really take things upon different mindsets whenever I approach a new book to keep, maybe I'll open up to a new audience. Maybe this audience was like really into this book, but now they're curious how I would go down this other avenue. And sometimes that's just like the scariest, but the funnest and most challenging part, because you're like, I got to prove this to myself. And I'm also like opening up to new people and new potential readers that'll go to my old stuff as well.
Yeah, that's what I love about writing and creating. It's the challenge. If somebody says I can't do something, I just want to do it. It's the puzzle. It's trying to problem solve and make things work. And that's the one thing I could tell people about my comics is that I'm not going to make a comic just to make a comic. I'm not going to chase a trend. I'm not going to try to make a sequel just to cash in on the previous one's success. When I put out a story, it's because I feel compelled to tell that story. And that's why I bounce around all the time, is because I feel compelled to tell all these different things. And that's the one thing I could promise people when they pick up my stuff. It's that, look, I put everything I have into this book. I'm not going to dedicate as much time, energy, effort, and money into something that I wasn't 100% behind just for the sake of appeasing an audience or trying to cash in on something. So I put out books that I knew were going to do terrible on Kickstarter just because I loved it that much.
I mean, yeah, you pour that much time and effort into something, and it's like your story. Like you got to put that effort out there, and I admire the hell out of that. What makes you go towards Kickstarter? Like crowdfunding wise, why do you choose that over other crowdfunding platforms?
I think Kickstarter is still the best game in town. I didn't really take the Kickstarter route to begin with. I wanted to work with publishers. I wanted to get into bookstores. I tried a more traditional route, and I hit a lot of walls, and I got very frustrated. And the pitching process does not cater to up and coming creators, to put money and time and energy into a pitch that might go nowhere. It's kind of like, it was frustrating for years. And then finally I had a bunch of friends who were getting into the Kickstarter crowdfunding game, and they nagged me enough. And I had a situation where I had an anthology with a publisher, and he just like folded out of nowhere. And I'm like, now I got this book, I want to put it out, I might as well run a Kickstarter. And the crowdfunding provided me that opportunity to like, look, I don't need a publisher. I found out the more control I have over the process, the more comfortable I feel,
Mm-hmm.
And going to Kickstarter allowed me to learn how to letter, do production design, do packing and shipping, and all that other and marketing. It allowed me to take more control over my comics future, which just felt so much better than I was trying to just do the traditional route of getting into a publisher, putting it out to comic stores. It made me happier, and that's
Nice.
what it's about. You need to have a better mental state when doing this stuff. So going to crowdfunding and going to Kickstarter in particular is what allowed me to get into the mental state that said, look, I have an avenue to do this, because trying to go with a publisher, it felt like I didn't have a road forward.
Makes sense. Really makes sense on that. And having that creative process and control, it comes down to like what every creator has ever talked about when they sign with a record label, with a publisher, that they just wanted to have more of themselves in it. And I feel like you really do get stripped down when you're going down like some of those paths sometimes. It really does take away some of what you put into it and what you want to have into it. And so when you're doing all this on your own, like, and you're balancing your family, you're balancing like, probably like a day job of some sort. Like, what are you doing to keep yourself on track to knock this out and, provide the effort that goes into promoting a Kickstarter and also continuing your works?
Mania.
Honestly.
So it's weird. I hear people talk about creative burnout, and they're like, I'm writing all this stuff and I'm burnt out and I can't think anymore. I don't really experience that the same way other people do. I get burnt out on my family. That's what burns me out. I need breaks from them. But that's another great thing about having so many different projects, is that it's kind of like spinning so many different plates in a way. But if I'm like stuck on a script and I don't want to write script, I'll open up this project and I'll start lettering, or I'll plot this story, or I'll look at a proof art from this story. So I have so many different projects in so many different stages of production that it doesn't ever feels stale. And like I said, I'm only picking stories that I enjoy, that I like working on. So my wife, I never stop like doing the comics thing. So my wife gets pissed at me when we're sitting down. She's like, "You want to watch TV?" I'm like, "Sure." And I open up my computer and I start doing work. She's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know. I got free time." You're like, "Not free time. This is our time." I'm like, "Whatever." So
I relate to that so much.
I write a lot on my phone. Like
Okay.
it's about stealing minutes or seconds. You know, if I'm online at the pharmacy and I'm bored and I got nothing to do, I'll whip out my phone and I'll write some dialogue. You know, it's just I try to maximize every down second that I have, which does it's mania. Like I said,
Yeah, honestly, yeah.
it gets a little nuts, but I enjoy it. I feel like I'm wired for that.
And so where did this come from? Like this desire to write and create and build these worlds? Like how young were you trying to do all this?
I don't know. Young, as far as I can remember. I tell people that in elementary school, you know, in like first grade, they give a writing assignment to all the kids. So
Mhm.
everybody starts out storytelling and writing. And when I was done with that assignment, I just didn't stop. I went home and I continued to tell weird stories. And my parents every once in a while pull out like a scrap of loose leaf. I'm like, "Well, you wrote this in second grade." I'm like, "Put it away." But and it's just I loved the characters. I loved consuming media too. It didn't matter video games, movies, comic books, TV. I loved consuming it. And then as I consumed it, I wanted to tell stories with those characters. So fan fiction was really where it was born. I had a desire to play around with these toys, you know, these characters that I love to tell their follow-up stories and stuff. And then I started transitioning into my own stories. And at some point, I was just like, you know what? It's time to put this out into the world and hear people tell me how bad it is. So,
Yeah, I
it's
got you
just,
there. Is that feeling of like your older work, maybe even some of your first work, do you have like any cringe feelings towards that? Or are you really like just that's like where you were and you're still very happy and acceptful of your older work?
it's funny you say that because I never view the stories themselves as cringe. I might view the execution as cringe. Like I started as a prose writer, so I wrote short stories and novels and stuff. And I might go back to some of those stories and I'm looking at my prose and I'm like, this is pretty bad. But the plotting, the characters, like the essence of the story itself is still good. I always believed that I could do that.
Hmm.
So I've had novels that I've gone back. My very first novel, it was titled Genocide. And I wrote it. I don't know. I started in high school. I toiled with it in college. I rewrote it probably a dozen times, and then I ended up having it published through a publisher, and it was called A Weapon's Journey. So the title
Cool.
changed. The story was rewritten a whole bunch of times, but I felt immensely proud that this original novel that I wrote, it's been torn to shreds a bunch of times and re put back together, and it was completely different than the original incarnation, but it was still that the essence of the story was still the same. So to see it published as an adult, something that I started as a kid, it's pretty cool. I do as I read, I can't remember where I read it. I think it's a famous quote. Art is never finished, only abandoned. And that kind of resonated with me a little, that if you go back enough, you can keep toying with something forever. So that's how I view a lot of the older work. That it needs to be revamped. That's it.
I love that. I went through a very similar thing with a story. It was something I was working on, with my kind of like one of my first ideas that I was like, this is my first big idea, but it was too big of idea. Like I knew I wasn't a skilled enough writer to
Everybody
write it.
has that.
Like, yeah.
Everybody.
Like you're just like, I am not smart enough for this, but
Well,
I'm going to do it
you know
one
what?
day.
You are smart enough to know that, because a lot of people, me included, are not smart enough to recognize that, and they just go for that big idea right out of the gate.
And that's what I did. I tried to turn it into a comic and I was like, I don't know how to find an artist. I'm turning it into like a novella, kind of like I was really into Michael Moorcock at the time and how he was publishing the
Okay.
Jerry Cornelius stuff on like different magazines. So every chapter was like various and you kind of had to put it together. So I tried doing that all in prose and it kind of just faltered apart. And now years later, like 5, 6 years later now, I had an artist approach me about a project, and I was like, I have this idea called the broadcast dialogues. We could try to revamp it. And it just totally went under a revamp. And now it's like one of the coolest things I've been working on and obsessively trying to world build and make it bigger and badder than it was. And I'm like, it just needed to sit. It was there. It just needed to sit for a few years.
I never throw anything away. I save like everything that I work on that I scrap. Stupid ideas that I know are terrible, I still write down. I have a whole list of just premises. So yeah, I'm a big fan of recycling things, keeping them fresh, and it's a lot of it's brain power, to think of these stories and to put stuff together requires a lot of brain power, and I don't like wasting things. So I do waste some stories. Sometimes I come up with ideas that are so ridiculous. I have friends. I just don't want to like come up with an idea, say, hey, that's stupid, and then forget it. So I might just like text them really quick, the premise, and they'll laugh. So at least somebody gets to share in my ridiculousness. It's a good outlet. But for the most part, if something pops into my head and I think it has legs, but my plate's too full at the moment, I'll write it down. And maybe 5 years from now, I'll pick it back up and run with it.
Yeah, you honestly, as a writer, it's your best option. Like none of your ideas are bad. They're just like, you just got to fluff them up. You just got to work on them. You just got to, your first idea, your first thought is probably like, oh my gosh, this is brilliant. This is amazing. Get it down. And then you look at it later, like, all right, this needs some work,
And then you, when you wake up in the morning, the drugs have worn off. You realize that might need a little tweak.
Yeah, the extra tweaking. And then that's where the obsession and the mania comes in to like, get it there, to get back to that original thought where you're just like, this is the greatest $1 million idea ever, and it's going to be beautiful. It's keeping that faith and that momentum into your writing as you're doing it too, because I feel like that's sometimes the hardest part when you're in the middle of the weeds and you're like, how do I take the next step in this like journey as you're writing? It just feels sometimes like you're stuck and you can't move. How do you get through some of those moments where you're just like, I'm here, I have an idea where to go, I just don't know how to like momentumly like take a few steps and get there and get our readers there?
There are things that I do to kind of break through that wall. I find long monotonous tasks to be great. So in the shower is a great, because when you're by yourself just doing stuff. If I have to go on a long drive, like let's say I have a premise, but I have to plot it out, I'll save that work for when I know I have to go on like an hour-long drive by myself.
Oh, cool.
I'll be like, I'll just think of it then. Going for a run is helpful to kind of just work through that stuff in your head. A weird one is walking up and down the grocery store. Like before I had kids, my wife and I would go shopping together, and I would just disappear. And she'd be like, where'd you go? And be like, I don't know. I was just walking up and down the aisles thinking of stories. But just like, yeah, just disappearing sometimes and being in your own head and just kind of working through it like helps. One of the best things I made my wife buy me was a waterproof notepad in the shower. So wow. Yeah, so I'm in the shower and I'm just like shampooing. I'm like, oh, and then I write down like an idea or a line of dialogue, and it's all free. I'm doing it like really quickly, so it's all scribbles. And my wife will come back and she'll see it in the morning and be like, how can you read this? I'm like, I know what I wrote. And sometimes I don't, and I have to wing it. But yeah, I try not to let those things just like fleet away,
Yeah, exactly. Capturing them as fast as you can, because every single time I've been like, you know what? I'm going to remember this in the morning and pick back up on it. And I might remember, wanted to remember it, but it never comes back. And once you lose some of those thoughts, you're just like, I lost the most critical piece of art I was ever going to work on ever.
I have many moments where I'm falling asleep and I'm like, if I remember this in the morning, it's important enough to remember. And I never do.
Yep. Exactly.
You know what I do?
That's always my case too.
I have an Alexa by my bed. So I'm like about half asleep and I go, Alexa, make a note that the prince needs blue eyes. And then I'll wake up in the morning and I'll see it and I'm like, I don't know what that's about.
Yes, exactly. I think, Neil Gaiman was talking about that, where maybe it was him and someone else who were talking about, just coming up with like, they would write down their dreams all the time, or, they'd wake up in the middle of the night and write their frantic thoughts and like, whatever dream they had, so they could try to capture it and turn it into a story at some point. And eventually it got to the point where he was like, I just kept on waking up, and then there would be like the man with the purple pants and the scarecrow face. And he's just like, I have
Nonsense.
no idea what this means or what to turn it into. And it's just like nonsense, you know?
I've had a couple moments where I turn my dreams into stories or use them for ideas and stuff. But yeah, writers sometimes can't shuffle through their own nonsense. It's just my. But you know what? I have kids that enjoy my nonsense, so it helps me to justify it. You know,
Do you feel like having
they
kids
appreciate
like
it.
keeps you in that young mental mindset too? Like you're with them and you're in this like universe that just hasn't really been like crafted or tamed, and they can kind of inspire you in that sense?
It's tough to say. I like to think that I would still be that same creative person if I didn't have kids, but it's hard to like think about that what if. I can only imagine where I am now. And I tell people all the time, and you could see it in a lot of my work. My relationship with my kids definitely inspires me, and I use it for stuff. The book I kickstarted in January was a Where the Wild Things Are book. And it was a nightmare version of Where the Wild Things Are. And I needed to form some sort of. The Where the Wild Things Are is weird because it's great. Everybody remembers it. But if you read it, it doesn't have much in terms of like characterization and relationships. Max is just this kid who goes on this wild thing and he meets these creatures. And I didn't want to do that. I want to provide more of a journey for the main character. And I struggled with it a little bit until I like just thought horror, kids, my daughter loves horror. And then I just modeled the character after my daughter, and I put a father in, and I mirrored that on our relationship. And I used that as like the backbone for which the springboard that the story goes off of. So it's weird sometimes how they can just, even if I am not in, I didn't never set out to make a story about my daughter, but it's somehow she kind of snuck in there as the foundation for it. And again, I had my son came in and he jumped on the couch. He let out the biggest fart I think I've ever heard. And we all died laughing. And he called it his fart bomb. And now I am about to put the finishing touches on a book called The Fart Bomb that involves my entire family.
That's amazing.
It's my first true all ages book. Like it's just written with kids in mind, but I wrote it in a way that I would enjoy reading it. So if an adult that has a silly, goofy sense of humor, they're gonna like it too.
That's
And
cool.
yes, I never said like I'm gonna write a book based on my son. What should it be about? No, he just farted one day, and I'm like, that's the story.
Yeah, that's it. That's how it works. You know, like we pull from life, and it doesn't matter what avenue of life you're on. It somehow inspires and sparks stories within all of us. And that's cool that you can have a singular moment, and, you know, it could have been any moment, and you pulled from that and created an entire story from that, just like wild, insane. Like you have the title, and then you have like a concept, and you're like, I'm just gonna run with this, you know? And that's literally how sometimes the funnest and like craziest and wildest ideas come from, is that reality came about, showed us something, and we're like, you know, I'm just gonna run with that entire thing reality just gave me.
My book I'm launching in July is a book I'm very excited about. It's a meta kind of rom-com about a fourth wall breaking character. He's like a self-aware comic character, and he has a conversation with his creator and stuff. And it's finished. I've had some people read it and give me some thoughts, and they said, "This is great, Frank. I love your meta stuff." And I was thinking, yeah, if you set out to make a meta story, like a fourth wall breaking story, it comes across forced and natural. But these were stories that just like the inspiration came to me naturally, and I just kind of ran with it. And I think a lot of my stories are like that. I never set out to make a particular thing. They're just things that it developed within me naturally, and I just kind of ran with them. And I think that resonates with people when they have that authenticity to the origins of the story.
Oh, hands down. Yeah. That's where you clasp on and be like, you know, I've kind of been here before. And that's where, like, you know, the truth, being a truthful writer and having that truthful aspect of it, that's what hits most people, to be honest. And I feel like those little bits of truth I have in stories resonate so much harder than the thing I'm like trying to force down and get that message across to like be resonant with someone.
Don't get me wrong. If somebody hires me, I will write whatever you want me to write. But for my own sake, if I'm putting something out, it, like you said, it has to have a kernel of my truth in it.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna fabricate something because readers know. They know when you're pandering to them or something, and I don't want to do that. Pandering is the last thing I want to do, even if I do it by accident.
Yeah, honestly, I feel you there. Yeah, and sometimes it just happens. It's part of it. It's part of
Yeah,
the process. You're like, I need to get this point across, guys. Like
yeah.
for this to understand the rest.
The main series I'm doubling down on in the future is called Grim Space. It's a mashup of fairy tales and sci-fi. So it's like Pinocchio in space, Jack and the Beanstalk, and it's a big universe. And I criticized somebody that was chasing the fairy tale kind of gimmick when they did
Hmm.
stuff, and they're like, Frank, don't you put out a Grim Space? And I'm like, you're right. It is this kind of the same thing, but that was like never my intention. I
Hmm.
never just thought I need to use these fairy tales in some sort of weird way. It was like I had this story I wanted to tell, and I saw the potential in expanding the universe, and I kind of ran with it. So I fell into a trope, I fell into a trend, but that was never the goal. And hopefully, I inadvertently catch it.
Dude, yeah, it's interesting going down that. And talking about like your process and everything, it sounds like you go from like abstract ideas that spark a story to like finding something within a character to like begin a story. Like, what is your how do you know when you have it? How do you know when you're just like, this needs to be fleshed out more? This is like the person that this is about, and I need to chase down this character. Or how do you go from plot and making it about character? Because I know some stories focus so much on the plot, you get lost in that, and you're like, it's a cool idea, but the characters didn't, work well at all. How do you keep that balance and making it story and character focused?
You're getting into the weeds here of storytelling and story building. So there are five main building blocks of story. You hit upon a bunch of them: plot, character, setting, theme, and tone.
Mhm.
And one of those has to be the foundation of your story. So if you have a character driven story, you have to start with that character and what that character is going to be. And a lot of times people do that and then they get distracted by the plot and they lose their character. Be like, that's where you
Yep.
started with. You can't
Yep.
do that. Setting could be the main thing. Sometimes people say, you know what, I want to make a Western that takes place in Antarctica, in which case setting is the cornerstone of your story. You always have to come back to that. So whatever you decide to focus on is the thing you need to put the most amount of energy into. And then everything kind of grows from there. Obviously, if it's you can't just have a setting, you can't just have a Western in Antarctica. You still have to have characters and plot, but it always has to come back to that original kernel, the original building block that you decided to focus on. I don't have no idea if that answered your question, but it sounded
No,
good.
no, that's brilliant because okay, Western in Antarctica, you know what I mean? Like what you're gonna do in that instance is be like, okay, why the in Antarctica? Because this is clearly like a bunch of cowboys, So you're pulling towards that gravitational like pull of like, okay, I'm interested. These characters are bizarre, and now they're in a bizarre setting. What's gonna play out? And that Antarctica aspect like better answer some questions on why these dudes are there. I love that because you
Yeah,
can even turn it around.
everything has to follow from that initial whatever you decided to make the story on. Whatever the initial inspiration was, whatever the initial spark was, everything has to funnel back into that. And like you said, why are the characters there? And then you focus on one character. Why is he specifically there?
Mhm.
And then what tone are you going for? Is it going to be funny? Is it going to be silly? Is it going to be serious? And you have to everyone you put these building blocks on top of each other, and before you know it, you got a story.
Yeah. And I think people get tone mixed up with like the palette of everything, especially as a writer. When
Yeah.
writers hear the word tone, I feel like they get thrown off so much, but you're absolutely right. It's kind of just like, I'm not like a genre fan, I'm not like, oh, I love sci-fi. I love this because like, Star Wars it's a sci-fi, but there's nothing like, there's so many things you could go into genre that doesn't make it sci-fi. And then there's with a Western, you could go the same route in that aspect where Cowboys versus Aliens, I mean, great example. Like it's a Western, but it's a sci-fi. You know what I mean? It's interesting
I,
seeing how you could balance those too.
I was talking with my wife about this the other day. Is that I'm I'm not a Star Trek guy, but I'm trying to work my way through all the series now. And I'm
Nice.
on Deep Space Nine, and there was an episode of Deep Space Nine where one of the plots was the main commander in charge of the station, Cisco. He's concerned about his son because his son is hanging out with his friend, and he's not coming home for dinner, and he's staying out late, and he feels like his son is being rebellious. And the friend he's hanging out with is an alien of a different species, and his father doesn't want him hanging out, so they don't want them hanging out together. And it's sci-fi. It's like two species that aren't going to click together, that they want to be friends. And he goes out looking for his son when he's out late one night, and he sees him teaching this alien how to read. And he has this like sense of pride and joy. And that kind of resonated with me as a father. And at the end of the day, it's drama, it's sci-fi. You're on a space station hundreds of years in the future, but they grounded the tone in real everyday drama. So tone is a weird thing. It's like you can have modern tone, modern drama, like This Is Us on NBC, and just set it in space, so that's kind of what tone is.
Yeah, I love that. And, I feel like with an artist, you could say tone and that clicks in a lot of things. But with a writer, it's completely different. And I love having that definition of it. Even like story, like what would you define story as? For example, like when I think of story, I think of survival information. Like I'm giving a piece of information to help someone through a moment, a situation, a crisis, a thought. It's survival information I'm passing on, stuff that I've experienced or thought of and know, and I'm going to tell you the story about it. So I'm explaining my aspect. I'm giving you this stuff that helped me survive. Like, how would you define story?
I think story is the culmination of all those various building blocks. And I think the one that people get most confused about is plot. A lot of people think that story is the plot. Star Wars is the Empire, and they're trying to overthrow the Empire. I mean, that's the plot, but the story is so much more than that. It's about each character's individual struggle. It's about the tone. Is it super funny? Is it super dark? It's just all of those different pieces coming together. The plot there are some things where plot doesn't matter at all. And a great example I use for this is the first Deadpool movie. It has the dumbest plot ever. It has no plot. It's really no plot. I mean, the girl gets kidnapped and he has to rescue her. It has no plot. But
nothing. Yeah.
But it's like my favorite X-Men movie because it leans so heavily on character and having Ryan Reynolds just be Deadpool that it just makes it for an entertaining film from beginning to end. It leans on tone and it leans on character. And so the plot is nonsensical. The plot at that point doesn't matter. It could be anything. As long as Ryan Reynolds is in it being Deadpool, it's fun. So I would argue with people that sometimes plot doesn't even matter. It all depends on the vehicle.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. I completely agree with that. You have to have those fun stories sometimes, and I went through a phase where I was a real stickler where one of my favorite shows, I've talked about it on the show many times. It's called You Are a Storyteller. In fact, I encourage you to check it out. I think you'll love it. Every writer I've shown it to or creator that's checked out a few episodes have come back and been like, thank you for showing me You Are a Storyteller. And what I snagged from them was the concept of an armature. And basically what that is, like when they used to make monster movies back in the 70s and 80s, they would have whatever monster creature, they would have the frame of it. And that's called the armature. So when they're shooting and pieces fall off and they got to replace it, they don't, forget what goes where, and they know how to fix it because of the armature. And they to put that and put into story perspective on like your armature is not necessarily a theme, but just like the main point of your story that you're trying to get across, like your Northern Star. So when you're stuck, like what we were saying earlier, like where do I go with this character? Where do I go with the scene? How does it follow your armature and how does it get you there? And that helps keep you like, okay, I need to like change the dialogue in this direction. I need to put them into this to lead here. And it kind of helps answer some questions. I felt like that was like a really big guiding point that just like took away theme and plot and those, educational aspects that you kind of get confused about sometimes and mixed up and like, muddy at some point. And it kind of just simplified it for me. And I felt like following that was like the easiest avenue for me to be like staying on track with the concept I'm going for with that story and the message I'm trying to convey with it too.
Yeah, that sounds like that initial building block that I was talking about. Like, why am I writing the story?
Hmm.
What's the point? Why did I start writing in the first place?
Yeah.
When you come up with the initial idea, and let's say you're writing a novel and you get 50 pages in, and you just kind of have run away from that initial whatever kernel of idea that you had, you have to bring it back.
Hmm.
And yeah, it helps, like you said, to have that north star that kind of guides you forward. I see that a
Yeah.
lot in comics too, because people get so wrapped up in comics is a culmination of so many different aspects of artwork. And when you're writing a story, sometimes you get so wrapped up in big splash panels and crazy action sequences and page turns that you forget, like, why am I making this thing in the first place?
Yep.
So it really helps to have all of those T's crossed and I's dotted before you go into artwork, so that you really know that what you started the comic for is what the art is going to become.
Yeah, exactly. That's very well said. And so, have you dealt with various publishers in the past, like, the pitching process for like your novels and everything too? Um,
I mean, for someone at my level, I don't really pitch novels. I kind of write them and then you have to submit them, which
Mhm.
stinks because if you don't, if nobody likes them, they just kind of sit there. I have a whole bunch of manuscripts that just kind of sit on my computer because I'm terrible at getting my work out there. I have a whole bunch of unpublished stuff. I have a lot of comic scripts that are written that I have no plans to actually produce simply because I had a story I wanted to tell and I wrote them. Um, yeah, I have stuff that I've written that I never submitted anywhere simply because I finished it and then I went on to work on the next thing and I forgot that I actually
Yeah.
have to send this somewhere.
Yeah.
So I'm really bad at that. Like I said, I'm not a salesman. I'm a storyteller. So I sometimes forget that I have to sell the things that I make.
But I mean, that's a good beneficial thing too, is because you are putting out stuff and you are publishing stuff. So I feel like some of like even with me, my writings that don't really see the light of day after I write it. Sometimes I just get that idea out and flush it, and some like I forget like it's there, or I'm progressing so fast through other things, it just gets lost in the shuffle. But like it's helped me, it grows me as a writer, and it's a solid exercise, and it keeps me moving and the gears turning somehow.
I think a lot of comic writers, a lot, forget to keep writing.
Yeah.
They'll write a script and they'll say, okay, now I need to make this book, and they'll go find an artist and they're like, well, I'm waiting on the art, I don't know what to do. I'm like, write another script.
Yeah, yeah, keep writing.
Keep
Yeah.
writing. Like, you don't have to make things, you could just write things, and then if somebody says, hey, I want you to pitch me a story, look, I have a script already finished. Or if you need to produce a comic and you're not inspired, you have something already finished. So I take the mantra from the movie Finding Nemo, when Dory's just like, just keep swimming, just
Yep.
keep
Yep.
swimming. I'm just keep writing, just
Yeah.
keep writing. So I say, write a little bit every day, keep that momentum going. And I have a whole back catalog of unpublished stuff that maybe one day will come out. But you know what? It gets it out of my brain. It's less
Yeah.
space, that it frees up space. So I'm happy just to have that stuff. Maybe one day it will come out, but you know what? I don't plan on checking out anytime soon. So I think I have some years ahead of me to do it.
And what's great about that too is like you're going to have your really good writings and you're going to want to make sure those see light of day, hopefully, potentially, that's the goal. But like sometimes your good writing isn't going to see the light of day, and sometimes your bad writing seems the light of day. But the thing is that if you just keep writing and putting out stuff as much as you can, your bad writing is going to get put under your good writing, and it's just going to keep on going. And you're going to have bad writing that never see the light of day. Like you need those good and bad, aspects to build upon. You got to write a bad story to like know, like, you know what, dude, I tried to do this and it just did not come out well. I guess I'm gonna have to reevaluate this recipe and try a new formula. And that's where another story is going to come into play. And maybe after doing that really bad story, that next one's going to be fantastic because you learn so much from it. You've got to just kind of crash and fail with some stuff sometimes.
I tell people all the time, look, it bad words are better than no words at all. So
Yep.
just get them down. And I told you about when I saw you at the con, my show right now, and I want you to come on that and we'll write something together.
Yes.
But I write the most ridiculous stories on that show. They don't make any sense at all. They're so goofy, they're so silly, but it's such a good time because it's about the journey, not the destination. And it's just it doesn't make sense. A lot of them are nonsensical, but it's the exercise of just getting together with another writer, wrapping our brain around this concept and having a story. We have a story at the end. People could read it. Is it stupid? Is it silly? Is it fun? Sure. It's not meant to be some polished work, but it's the process. It's getting the gears turning. And that's kind of what it's all about.
It's kind of like when you're with like one of your really good friends and something ridiculous happens and then you just spin off of it for like 5-10 minutes and you're just laughing and just keep on building and building. And then at the end of it, you're like, we need to make this a story. Like this needs to be a comic. That's what that show is kind of like about. And I love that, you know?
I did an episode, I think it was on Tuesday with my buddy Mike Watson. He's a big superhero guy. So the theme of the story was powers. So every sentence we had to at least show some superpower being used. And we are both superhero fans, and we just had a blast coming up with ridiculous powers and ridiculous superhero names. Before we knew it, we were done. We had an entire pantheon of superheroes. I came up with a multiple man kind of guy called Carbon Copy. I was like, this is the greatest name for a character. It was just a good time, and that's kind of what writing is about. The ultimate question I pose to writers, I say, look, if the writer's gods comes down from the heavens and determine that everything you will ever write will never see the light of day, it will have to get printed and filed away in an attic for nobody to ever see, would you still write? And my answer to that is yes. Like, I don't care if people really see it. I have a blast coming up with these stories. And I think that's the mark of someone who truly loves just being a storyteller. And that's the ultimate question I like to pose to people.
You know, that's like with Apollo, you know, when we try to publish people and get them signed on with us, and we're really selective because it's a very small show running it, me and Alex. But it's one of those things where like they would be making comics no matter if we were helping them or not. And whatever help we give them, whatever support and putting them under our branding and all that stuff, that is awesome. But you know what? Their passion and the drive is what gets our attention. You know, it may not be the greatest story, the greatest writing, the greatest artwork, like, and some of those factors do come into play. But like, I love people that are just passionate creators and that would be doing this if it saw the light of day, if they had no other option, if they try to get this taken away, they'd still figure out a way to make art. And that's what I want, you know? People that just want to do it.
I find it so hilarious. I have a lot of new creators message me asking for advice, and I give them tips. And at the end, I'm kind of like, guys, I have no idea what I'm doing. A lot of this is trial and error. I'm winging it just like you are. The only reason I can give you answers to your questions is because I did the wrong things. So yeah. So and if they want to take that advice and run with it, I think the comics community is really supportive in that way, more so than the novel and prose community. In that it's kind of, I mean, people help a little bit, but at the end of the day, you're by yourself trying to just get your novel out. But there's so many resources out there for comic creators to just learn about everything, to learn about craft, marketing, running a business, like all that stuff. And everybody's supportive and everybody wants to see everybody be successful. No, we're technically all competitors. It's just we all recognize how hard this is, and we're in it together. You know, we're in the trenches together.
Yeah, and honestly, the comic book community has only continued to grow in that direction. I feel we've only continued to like, you know, realize like, hey, we're all getting stashed in the corner in all these conventions. We should try to like uplift each other a little bit more. And this isn't, you know, competing against all that. Do you feel like when you're tabling, you're like, I always consider it like we're all in a giant, you know, football stadium winging our book in front of somebody at center stage in the middle of the field trying to get their dollar, you know? How do you feel that competition aspect of making comics is? Or do you feel like there's competition making comics?
That convention, IC3, was a great convention because it doesn't feel like I'm competing with, when I'm in Artist Alley, right? It doesn't feel like I'm competing with tables behind. It feels like I'm competing with the tables behind, the vendors that are selling back issues of Spider-Man, that are selling pops, the guest celebrities that are trying to get signatures or trying to sign stuff. Those are the people I feel like I'm competing with. And
Mhm.
so IC3 was so great because it felt like a convention of just Artist Alley. I didn't have to convince somebody that came by my table who's there to see Spider-Man or who's there to see, I don't know, a Stranger Things star to be invested in my book. They understood when they walked through those doors what they were getting into. And so it was that much easier to pitch them. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I don't feel competition to the people beside me. And the fact that those other distractions weren't at that convention, it made things a whole lot easier. And that's what I liked about it.
I feel like IC3, I was saying it at the panel I did, it was like we're putting comics back in Comic Con. And it just like felt like the first show in so long that just was like really refreshing, where everywhere I looked was just comic book creators. And I loved it. I think I networked more than ever. I think I've spent more money than I expected to, too, just helping creators and just trading books and, stuff like that. It was great. Like,
Yeah.
it was a great time.
So stuff like Kickstarter, stuff like IC3, stuff that empowers independent creators to put their books out there is great. A lot of people have a difference of opinion on me when it comes to this, but I feel weird when I see like big mainstream publishers go to Kickstarter and
Mhm.
they say it's great because it's bringing new eyeballs to the platform, and that's true. But at the same time, as somebody who tried so hard to break into that publisher route and had a lot of doors closed and struggled to gain that momentum to get my foot in the door, and then went to Kickstarter and found an audience and found success. I found my place. And now the publishers that I couldn't like communicate with, who I wanted nothing to do with me, now we're like, "Oh, you went to Kickstarter? We'll follow you and we'll like launch our books on there." It feels a little, it feels like we're losing that little bit of independence, that comic indie comic creator mindset. So I'm torn between that development. And a lot of people disagree with me, but I'm human. I have emotions and feelings and I can't
Yeah,
help it.
there you go. I love it. Before we wrap up, you were just mentioning like a lot of writers hit you up for advice. Do you think you could like maybe sum up one or the two or three quick things that you seem to come across most commonly with writers asking for advice? And like, what would that advice be at that point? Aside from just writing too, because I know it's like a main bullet point behind anything.
Are you I mean there's that's a big area to kind of cover. Are you talking about crowdfunding or the comic creation process in general?
Comic
Or
creation
any
process. And yeah.
An easy thing is if you are a brand new comic writer, start small. Like that's kind of the key. Um, Writing a short story is a great way to cut your teeth. I was a big part of a forum, like a comic creators forum, and every week they had a script challenge where you wrote a 5-page script on a theme, and nobody ever made them, but like ever drew the scripts. But I did that week in week out for like a year, so I have so many 5-page scripts just sitting on my computer. But it was like comic creating boot camp, comic writing. I found out what worked, what didn't work. People would critique it, and it was great. And I have no use for those stories. I mean, at some point, maybe I'll do something with them, but that's the kind of idea. You need to pay your dues doing the small stuff before you try to branch out and do your magnum opus. So
Mhm.
start small is one of those. And I didn't when I first started. I did like you. I said I had this big idea, 6 issues. And that's the thing that sucks is we grow up reading DC and
Yep.
Marvel and we think that's the way superhero comics are supposed to be. So if we want to write a superhero story, we write a 6-issue arc of
Yep.
22 pages. And that's not how you start. And so understanding that is a big first step.
That's so true. And I admire that so much. And it's taken a lot of restraint on even myself to be like, you know what, these small anthology pieces I'm doing are going to benefit my bigger story so much more. Because, and what I've also kind of learned to do, this might be some good advice for someone, is that when I write shorter pieces, while I have this big idea in my mind, I kind of center all my anthology submissions and the short stories I write about characters in that universe. So I'm building shorter stories, but I'm also building that universe. And it's like baby steps towards that bigger goal I want to get to. But at least I'm like, okay, I knocked it out in a 4-pager. I knocked it out in a 12-pager. There's an 8-pager over here. Like stuff like that has really benefited me. And now my story structure is landing a lot harder and heavier. And I feel way more comfortable doing a longer issue now.
Yeah, like I said, nothing goes to waste. If it's part of a universe that you're building, you can use that somewhere else. And I sum up comic writing as resource management. You have a certain amount of pages, a certain amount of panels to tell a story. You have to manage those resources well and challenge yourself. Write a 1-page story and see if you could do it in 4 panels.
That's hard.
Come up with a big idea and try to figure it out. That's what it is. It's problem solving. So it doesn't have to be like a great story. It's an exercise. And through those exercises, you hone your skills and you just get better.
And, doing a story like that, honing it down to the smallest, most key elements to make it make sense. It sounds like, oh, a 1-pager, cake, whatever. It's the hardest fucking thing in the world. It is insane. You will be pulling your hair out. Like,
you can write a 1-page story. To write a good 1-page story that somebody reads and they're like, I had a good time reading these 4 panels. It's hard.
It's super hard.
Yeah.
I love it, dude. Frank, this has been an awesome hour of writing, and writing craft. Honestly, this has been awesome. Can't wait to listen back to this about all the advice and what we went through. Thank you so much for everything you have shared with us, and I can't wait to have you on the show again to talk about craft because I geek out on craft so much. It's my favorite thing to talk about on the show. So thank you so much for that.
I live it. Love talking about it. Thanks, Brandon.
Why don't you tell us what you're going to be up to, or where to find you actually, and for where to find your work, and what you'll be up to in 2024?
2024, is that this year?
Yes, I had to Google it the other day. I was like, what?
Comic writing is, when you're comic writing, you're always living in the future, planning like 3 years in advance. I'm Frank the Writer, so that's the best place to find me is frankthewriter.com. You can sign up for my mailing list. I got free stories there, a store. At Frank the Writer on socials. And for 2024, as of this recording, I'm currently wrapping up my second campaign of the year. I do 6 a year, so I have 4 more plans. And if you find me on socials or follow my mailing list, you're bound to bump into one of them.
Nice. I love it, dude. Any conventions you have planned out for this year?
I'm in New York. So I have a local convention that I plan on doing in our local convention center. They also have a horror tattoo convention that I'm trying out. I'm going to be like the weird comic guy that's there. So I think that's the best when you try to break into not a comic convention and be the only comic creator. Yep. So I'm interested to see what happens there.
Nice. Keep me posted. I would love to hear that because a lot of advice we've been giving out and talking about breaking into different conventions that aren't comic book focused, but you could be the comic book person there, and that's part of your audience. You have a horror book, do a horror, convention, and we did the same thing. We have some like stoner books coming out, so we have them going into like dispensaries and things like that. And it's like, you know what? Awesome. That's opening the market, and if someone goes and gets some stuff, you get a book at the same time.
I could just imagine someone like, I need to get some edibles. What, comics?
Yeah, exactly. Like that's who we're trying to cater to at that point. And it's the best way. Horror book, horror anthology, dude, go hit up those conventions, those art festivals, because you'll find someone who's going to be a fan of your work at that point. If I saw comics somewhere, I'd be drawn to it. So I love that. But thank you so much, dude. And for all of our listeners, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, hit that notification bell. And, no matter what, we love your comments and we love the reception back to the show. It really does fuel us. So thank you so much for leaving comments and reaching out to these creators afterwards. It really does make a difference to everyone growing this community. And as always, thanks for hanging, stay creative, and stay inspired. Looking for high quality printing, fast turnaround, and the industry's best customer service? Look no further than Comix Wellspring. Trusted by thousands of indie comic creators, Comix Wellspring is proven to be the go-to comic book printer. So when you're ready to bring your comic books to life, go to comicswellspring.com and be sure to check out one of the best platforms to sell your physical and digital comics online, the CWS Bookstore. Remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell to see our lives come out twice every single week on YouTube and podcast platforms. And also tag us when you share your favorite episodes and moments from the show. And remember, creators, thanks for hanging, keep creating, and stay inspired.
With